Star Wars 7 by 7 episode 1863 today. Why Batuu anyway? We're going to talk about its strategic importance to the First Order and the Resistance. Let's go. Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod and this is Star Wars 7 by 7. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode. And the scoop with Batuu, well, let's start off by saying that, one, we don't know exactly where it is, okay? So that makes the discussion of its strategic importance just a little bit difficult. However, there is a crucial fact that we know, and that is it is very close to the border of not just the unknown regions, but wild space as well. And so that basically means that it can only be in one of two general areas on the galactic map. So if you've seen the galactic map, and if not, then I highly encourage you to Google the galactic map for Star Wars. If you look on the left-hand side, if you will, the western side, the southwestern and northwestern corners are basically where the intersection of the known galaxy, the unknown regions, and wild space will intersect. We also know from various Star Wars stories that Batuu is a jumping off point for people heading into the unknown regions. It's sort of the last stop for refueling, resupplying before going into the unknown regions. And alternatively, we know coming the other direction that the First Order was growing unchecked in the unknown regions, trying to hide how powerful it was growing before they made their forays into the known galaxy. And so it seems rather logical that if Batuu is sort of a known area where one could go into the unknown regions, one could also come out of the unknown regions there fairly easily. And so it seems like that would be a very good bottleneck place, if you will, for the First Order to protect and to defend. It doesn't necessarily mean that that is where they started arriving out of the unknown regions and into the known galaxy. It certainly might be one of the places that they were, but it does seem like a very strategic bottleneck place that they would want to defend. And while we're at it, thinking of other places that they might want to defend against, well, that might be a reason why we might return to Jakku in The Rise of Skywalker, because that is another jumping off point. In fact, it was sort of the initial jumping off point for the remnants of the Galactic Empire to escape into the unknown regions after the end of the Battle of Jakku, in order to continue the Empire with the contingency planning that Emperor Palpatine had done. So you would think that that is potentially another entry point that they would want to blockade as well. Now, you might be asking yourself, why on earth would the First Order feel like they need to defend entry points into the unknown regions like Jakku and Batuu? Well, one of the possibilities that hasn't really been talked about with The Rise of Skywalker, at least I haven't really seen this anywhere, is the possibility that instead of the battle in The Rise of Skywalker, the big battles, if you will, taking place in the known galaxy, what about the possibility that the Resistance, as their last-ditch effort, tries to go into the unknown regions to find the heart of the First Order? We do know from The Last Jedi that initially, or at least at the time, there was no center of the First Order, that Supreme Leader Snoke's ship, the Supremacy, was acting as a mobile capital for the First Order. But now that he's gone, Kylo Ren might decide to do something else entirely, and might set his base up somewhere in the unknown regions, maybe in one of the places where the First Order's largest manufacturing efforts, for example, was underway, or maybe one of the glittering capitals that was supplying a lot of the funding for the First Order from the unknown regions, or at least receiving it, perhaps. I mean, there are a lot of options in that regard, but just the notion of the Resistance actually going into the unknown regions and taking the battle directly to the First Order, rather than fighting it out in the known galaxy, that's the sort of thing that I haven't really heard talked about, but I think that's kind of an interesting possibility to consider. As for why the Resistance is on Batuu, well, there are a couple of reasons why that might be the case, and they could be equally as valid as the other, or both partially valid in making up a greater whole. One of them is the fact that it is in probably the farthest corner of the galaxy, comparatively speaking, and therefore easy to hide in some sense, right? I mean, Luke said Tatooine was the planet that was the furthest from that bright center of the galaxy, but I think Batuu might actually be even further out, comparatively speaking. So if you're gonna hide and you're gonna resupply, then that's not a bad place to go. And especially if you have scoundrel friends like Hondo Ohnaka hanging out there too. Yeah, there you go. Another reason why they might be there is to keep an eye on the First Order. General Leia Organa had spies operating wherever she could get them. If she had the bodies to send out, she would do it. And one of the things that she had to monitor was growing First Order activity. Well, what better place to do that than in a place that's right near the unknown regions where they were suspected of operating? So hiding out and monitoring the First Order, there you go. And there is actually kind of a third thing, I sort of hinted at it already, and that's the notion of resupplying. And we learned from The Last Jedi that the Rebellion before it, and probably the Resistance now too, has all sorts of little supply caches stashed in far-flung places across the galaxy, just in case, saving for a rainy day, that sort of thing. And Batuu seems like a really good place to keep an extra stash of supplies in case they need it. So those are a couple of reasons why Batuu might be of particular strategic importance to the Resistance and to the First Order. I'm sure there are many more. In fact, we might learn a few more of them in The Rise of Skywalker. I mentioned Jakku being potentially important as well. There's one other planet that we haven't mentioned that is probably worth mentioning too, and I'll tell you what that one is after the break. Stay tuned. This episode is brought to you by Constant Contact, the premier email marketing solution for small businesses and organizations. I've used their service since 2003, and over the past decade and a half, I've watched them evolve, make the product simpler, more powerful, easy to use, and do everything that they can to help train people to use the product more effectively and for it to work with other forms of marketing like social media, for example. So check out sw7x7.com/email to learn more about Constant Contact and start a free trial. Once again, that is sw7x7.com/email for a free trial. Welcome back. So the one planet we haven't mentioned yet, and it's going to be kind of a sticky situation as to how they deal with it, is Castellon. And Castellon is the planet that was prominently featured in the first season of Star Wars Resistance, where the Colossus refueling station was. And the First Order basically wanted to keep it out of the hands of the Resistance. They didn't necessarily think it was a big enough deal for them to use. It was more that they didn't want the Resistance to use it. But Castellon was a place that was also nearby both the unknown regions and wild space too. So it had that same kind of intersection thing. We don't know yet where Castellon is either on the galactic map, if it's in that northwest quadrant or that southwest quadrant, and if it's anywhere near Batuu. We don't know. Additionally, Star Wars Resistance at the end of the season left Castellon entirely, and so who knows if that's going to end up reappearing in Star Wars. It very well might. It seems unlikely that they would create a planet only to abandon it entirely. I wouldn't be surprised to see Castellon actually show up, or at least be briefly mentioned, name-checked, referenced in The Rise of Skywalker. When you think back to The Last Jedi and Rey's statement about the First Order working to establish military control of the galaxy in a matter of weeks, well, the area around Castellon would be yet another point where you could certainly expect the First Order to come out of the unknown regions and try to establish that foothold in the known galaxy. If you think there are any other spots where that might be happening, hey, drop a comment and let me know where you think, wherever there's a place for comments, wherever you're catching this, or at home base for the show for this particular episode at sw7x7.com. And that is going to do it for the show today. Thank you so much for joining me for it, as always, and may the Force be with you, wherever in the world you may be.
This podcast is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox. It is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other related Star Wars items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the Force be with them. All original content is copyright 2019 by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.